Goes,
Oh, yeah, I
there's a
might.
lot of information on it. A lot. Everything is
Wait, I can do it. I emailed it to myself.
Yeah.
Good for you.
It's
Doesn't it feel good when you turn it in?
It's in the actually 3 times.
Really, at least it's done.
Yeah.
Good.
It took me the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Because I was doing something about at least in it's interesting.
Cool. You're fresh. Awesome. I'll vote for her.
Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Hi, Jess.
Hello.
No, Sean, the ASTA
Yes, the
conference is in Pittsburgh this year. You
I
really
know.
should go.
I'm not at the string project anymore.
Oh, that's
Oh, where is everybody?
It's such a
today?
great opportunity if you're not a teacher, you know, if you're not teaching. I think this is clever. That's a clever way to teach that.
Yeah,
Janet wants to know if you can send her an invite to the class.
Janet, that's right.
You should do that. Kids get a kick out of it. Awesome.
It's 7 o'clock in the morning.
It's 7 o'clock in the morning.
It's 7 o'clock in the morning right now in Korea.
Oh, I'm sorry, Janet.
Oh, there we go.
She said Janet is in Korea.
Janet is in
Yeah.
Korea.
Wow, cool.
It's 7 o'clock in the morning.
Charles Everyone. Still missing Don and Russia. And Angie. I think Angie is.
So what time was it? It was like Z.
You said you know.
I did invite Janet. Did she see it? Oh, we got her. Okay. Hi, Janet.
Hey.
Good morning.
Hi, Janet.
Congratulations with the thing and the ring and the finger.
She got what?
She
Oh, she got engaged. Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
In Korea? In Korea? In Korea?
no, I think it was before. There was a picture on her Facebook that I honestly scrolled over like 14 times until someone told me that they
Oh
was
my
right. I was like, oh!
Great man's holding something's different.
I just thought they were holding hands.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I thought it was
Good for her.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
All right, well, I don't know where the guys are. We're missing Gavin and Don and Justin.
Hello.
I feel like I've traveled into the future.
I mean, you kind of have.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You have traveled into the future.
That's weird.
Can you tell us what the good stocks to buy are so we can?
I wish.
Did we get Duke tomorrow?
Oh, yeah.
Who won the World Series?
Who won?
Oh, Lord.
That's,
Did she cut her hair?
she did that before she left.
She did, yep. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Dr. Balmer, you were the first one to talk to me about it. No other professor has mentioned anything about it.
About your hair?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, man.
I guess I'm shallow that way. I don't know.
He has daughters, that's why.
That could be it.
I didn't know that.
He gets it.
Well, I don't know where Don and Gavin and Justin are, but maybe they will join us at some point. So we'll probably have to go ahead and get going here. And I think I've invited everybody. I'm supposed to invite. Sometimes I forget.
For whatever reason, I can't see you.
You can't see me?
Mm-mm.
Have you tried plugging in your monitor?
How about if I turn my camera on? Now can you see me?
No, this app couldn't open because it isn't communicating properly.
We can see you.
Oh, okay. I'll just listen in, I guess. It's not really
Oh, so you're just not getting any picture at all? What do you see in your...
It just says there was an error loading your app! Exclamation point.
Oh. Well, maybe you want to try and close it and open it again or something like that.
Does that mean that you would have to invite me again?
I can do that.
Okay,
If you just quit the chat, I can send you another invite.
Okay, I'll try that.
All right.
I'm trying to convince Janet to bring me home a radish.
Just like- Oh, yeah, I'm thinking like a little red radish.
No. She was showing the pictures the one day, like Korean radishes.
Oh.
Just one more.
Okay.
With the size of watermelons.
Wow. Well, I don't know.
Hey, there we go.
Can you see us now, Janet?
Yes, I feel like I'm there.
Great, okay.
Yay.
Well, I think this is who we have, so we'll go ahead and get going here. All right, so I guess the first thing to do is ask if everybody got my feedback on your bibliography and your topic statement that I sent over the last week. So if you didn't get anything from me, then it means I didn't get anything from you.
That's right.
So please, if you want feedback, which I hope you do, get that to me as soon as you can. I did get your rough draft. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I will try and do so by the end of the weekend. Does anybody have any questions or problems with their project that we should talk about right now? Especially those of you who are online who I don't see or hear from as often. How are things going for you guys in terms of your project?
They're going better for me. I got some books coming in the mail, and I found some better sources on interlibrary loan. So.
Okay. All right. So interlibrary loan, some of those, if it's an article, they'll send you an email, and you'll be able to get the PDF that way.
Yeah, and they actually called me today and said there were 2 books there and that they could mail them. So they can mail them. It's just complicated to set up that way because I was struggling to have it set up to be mailed.
I see. Okay. Wow, they mailed them too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they were very helpful.
All right. Well, good. Laura, you doing okay with yours?
I have a couple articles, and I was gonna head to Westchester on Wednesday because teachers have a half day,
Okay.
and check out their library to see what I could pick up
Yep.
because I don't have any books right now.
Okay.
I just have a couple
All right.
articles.
All right. I don't know what the rules are in terms of you being able to check out from Westchester, but you might just ask, maybe call the music library here and ask about that, because you ought to be able to do that with your IUP card. I don't know.
Well, I have a friend that most of my colleagues here went to Westchester, and a couple are in the grad program there, so I'm just gonna borrow one of them.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Yeah, I don't know what their library is even like, so I'll be interested to hear what you find. Of course, if you venture into Philadelphia, the Penn Library would have anything that you possibly would want, I would think, too. So I don't know how far that is for you, or if that's an option, but
About an hour, depending on traffic.
okay. All right. Well, that's not too bad. So if you find that you're not, if you don't find what you need at WCU, you can go to Penn.
Okay.
So, all right. Yeah, Carolyn, you doing okay with yours?
Yeah, I'm doing fine so far. I ordered, I think, 2 books off Amazon because I have Prime and they were on sale. So
Okay.
I lucked out there, and then the rest are articles. I can connect to the VPN from where I'm at, so that makes it a lot easier.
Okay.
Yep, I'm good.
All right. Sounds good. And Jess, how are the Swiss libraries?
Oh boy. I feel like you need to, give everything but a blood sample to be a member.
No.
So I'm having some difficulties with that, but I tried requesting some PDF copies of some excerpts of books through IUP, but the 2 that I've requested so far, they said they were unavailable. So I'm not doing too good with books, but I'm finding articles. And since we've emailed and cleared a few things up, things are going a lot better. So.
Okay. Well, how close are you to Zurich?
About an hour and a half.
Oh, okay.
And 2 hours from Geneva, so.
You're in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, that makes life a little harder. So what's the closest big city to? Is it Zurich?
Zurich or Bern, actually, is only 45 minutes from us.
Oh, Bern, okay. Yeah, I don't know about Bern. I mean, they must have a university there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that.
Okay. If there's a book in our library and there's like a chapter or a photocopy you need from that, I can get that for you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Just let me know what it is, and I can pretty easily get a copy made and just email that to you. So something like that, or even if if there's a particular book and you know a section of it that you want, just let me know and I'll see what I can do.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Okay. And let's see, Janet, we've been talking, so I think we're okay. All right, good. And any other questions about that? So just don't forget about your papers, right? Don't leave it too late. You really want to get going on that as much as you possibly can now. And it'd be great to do some work over the break. I don't know if you're going to be traveling or if you're going to be in town. Of course, the library will probably be closed, but if you can get a hold of some of your sources and be reading or thinking about your paper over break, that would obviously help a lot. So, so if you can do that. In between bites of turkey, right? Sorry, Mom, I've got to go read my book. No, I hope you don't do that. You can take Thursday off. I give you a dispensation to take. Of course, you guys are probably you're probably flater mousing the entire break.
No, just
The weekends.
Just the weekend.
This Saturday and then next Saturday.
Okay, that's not too bad. Small business Saturday, you're going to be flater mousing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can go downtown and you can do your shopping in Indiana then. That's all right. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and get started on today's assignment. This is an interesting sort of little problem here in that we have a class on 19th century music, but obviously there are some limitations to that, which I didn't necessarily go into, but you're kind of seeing when we read this chapter what some of the limitations are. And one of the limitations is it's focused on Europe, and that makes a certain amount of sense just because of the incredible amount of music that's happening in 19th century Europe that we would focus on that. And, you know, so that makes a certain amount of sense. We don't get to focus very much on the United States, and while there's lots of interesting things happening in the United States, they don't have the resonance today maybe that they should or that they might have had. So while there are a lot of American composers in the 19th century, not a lot of their works get performed today. So we'll talk about a few of them, but you know, just at least to kind of get the landscape. The other thing that we don't really do is to talk about folk and popular music, which was pretty significant. I mean, if you talk about folk music in the United States, hugely important. Ballad singing, spirituals, slave songs, all of that kind of stuff is really interesting and important, but we don't really have time to get into it. So, you know, we'll leave that for a different kind of a class. If we do an American music class at some point in the future, then that would probably come up. But, you know, so we're kind of within the European classical tradition, and that's just sort of one of the limitations we have. So we have a number of questions here to talk about in terms of the Frisch chapter. I think we can sort of start with that. And some of these questions that I asked you to think about and discuss kind of go into what music was like in the 19th century. Frisch chooses to focus on a few different areas of the United States to give some idea of the variety of things that were happening in 19th century America without being able to do a really comprehensive discussion. But starting with Boston, it's maybe worth just pointing out a couple more things about Boston, about music in the United States in the colonial and pre-colonial periods. The first Europeans that we talk about, of course, there may have been Norwegians in the New World long, long ago, but the first Europeans that we talk about being in the New World were the Pilgrims, right? And what was their reason for coming to the United States, to what became the United States? What was the Pilgrims' reason for coming? Religion, yes. Were they looking for what?
When they look for India.
Looking for India. Actually, that was Columbus's idea. Yeah, he was looking for India. He thought he had found it. He was wrong by half the world. But you know, give or take a few thousand miles, he was close. So yeah, they were looking for religious freedom, right? The first people that came here, and their particular brand of religion was what? They were called the Puritans. And what were the characteristics of that religion? You are aware of it.
Well, they were definitely against the Church of England. They were
definitely against the Church of England, yes.
And they're plain. They dressed plain.
Okay, very simple, austere kind of religion. We tend to think of the Puritans as being very moralistic and straight-laced, you know, so forth, like we talk about them now. In terms of like the big religious directions, do you know which one they represented?
Protestant?
They were Protestants, and within Protestantism there were a number of different threads. And those threads were like Luther, of course, in Germany, right? The Church of England, that was another Protestant thread. We know they didn't represent that. And then the other major Protestant thread was Calvinism. Right? Calvinism started with John Calvin in Geneva, and then grew to influence other people in Europe. And the Puritans were Calvinists. They were into that particular kind of religion. So Calvin was a very fundamentalist kind of a guy, and he thought that in terms of music, the only music you should have is psalms, because that was the music that was in the Bible. The Bible has these literal songs, they're called psalms, and those were the only part of the Bible that was meant to be put to music. And so Calvin's view was that was the only thing you should sing in church, all right? So whereas the Catholics had all this wonderful church music, and they had instrumental music, and they had sung everything, he threw all of that out because none of it was biblical. to him. And in the service, all they did was sing psalms, and basically in unison. So when the Pilgrims came over, this was the musical tradition that they had. They sang psalms. And most of the first music in European circles then would have been just psalm singing. So, you know, there's 150 psalms, and you don't even need that many tunes to sing them. They had maybe 50 tunes that you could sing more than one psalm to those tunes. And for the first part of colonial history, you would have heard a lot of psalms. And the whole idea of singing psalms actually kind of gives rise to classical music in an indirect way in the United States. So they sang psalms for a long time. Many people sang them without being musically literate. So they just learned those psalm tunes, and then maybe they read the psalms themselves, but they didn't know how to read music or anything like that. Over the years, as people sang the psalms, they developed different ways of singing them, to the point where the psalms that they were singing in America in, say, 1750 were probably quite different than what they had brought from England in 1650, okay? And these newer kinds of psalms, they started to bother some people in America who thought they should be sung more according to the book and according to the way that those psalms were composed. So there was actually a big controversy about psalm singing. There was a big controversy between people who thought that the psalm should be sung kind of the way that everybody had been doing it, the sort of conventional way, or the people who thought you should have an actual sort of plan and procedure for singing the psalms, okay? So the people who thought we should all sing the psalms the proper way, they were the people who wanted to have musical notation, and they were the people who wanted to teach music to everybody, and they were the people who invented things like shape note singing, right? Shape note singing, you know what that is, I think many of you. Shape notes are when you make the notes into square and a diamond and a lozenge and a little triangle, and they are keyed to the solfege system, right? So that you can teach people how to sing in solfege. So the singing school movement, they were trying to teach people to sing from the book and to sing sort of the right way. And those people then go on to get into classical music. But they do it from this kind of religious perspective, right? So when we get to Boston in the 1800s, the institutions that are founded sort of come out of the church, and they come out of this move to get people singing the right songs and to sing them the right way. All right, so that's kind of the background to this. So the one of the first groups to be founded, one of the first musical institutions, this Handel and Haydn Society in Boston, they're coming out of that direction, out of the singing school direction, and they want to go even further with that. They want to get past having to use shape notes and get to sort of normal music theory and to teach everyone to sing Haydn and Handel. That was what they thought was the highest music in the land. And when they gave their first concert, that's what they performed, Messiah and Creation, right? So what's so great about Messiah and Haydn's Creation? What's so great about those things?
Well, I would say the first thing is it comes from their religious background.
It's religious.
So they probably were rooted in that as well.
Yeah, so it's hard to object to Handel's Messiah because after all, it's a biblical story. I mean, Calvin would have objected to it, but you know, by the time we get a little bit more distance from that, people are fine with doing, you know, it's got this classical pedigree, it comes from England, it's well recognized as being quality music, and it has an unimpeachable moral value in terms of its story.
And the structure itself, as you said, it's like the structure itself with Haydn is like classical, with Handel, the Baroque. It's the music is not out of the structure, out of their traditions.
Yeah,
it's very structured. They know what is going on. It's not out of the type they used.
Right. It tries to be very rational, and you know, all the things we talked about the classical period. That's what this music is. It tries to be very, very clearly structured. The meaning of it is obvious, and you know, so that held sway in America for quite a long time. And Romanticism actually took quite a long time to get established in the United States. So, Beethoven in the 1840s was still kind of a radical composer for a lot of Americans, who admired the earlier, more classical style and the oratorios and so forth. When I asked this first question here, how is music used to civilize and tame people in the United States, right? So what was that all about? How did people try to use music in that way? Yeah, Alex?
Something about how they would they would teach Native Americans how to sing, and it was always a gospel choir song, something of that nature, always with a religious background.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that would be one kind of thing, sort of teaching, missionary teaching to the Native Americans, which also happened in the Spanish-speaking part of the Americas, in Mexico, in South America, in California, and there they actually taught them how to sing Gregorian chant, as it describes in the excerpt. So they're trying to get them to be civilized according to European standards. Yeah.
is that kind of what you're asking about?
Yeah, no, that's a good example of it. Yeah, what other ways?
Well, I was just gonna on that Robert Louis Stevenson quote was amazing.
Yeah.
It was just it's the most exciting chapter I've read so far in this book, I think, because there are things in here that I didn't know at all. I never even knew existed. Duran, never heard of that, or Duran, or whatever that person did. And so that was fascinating. And then he heard them sing it years later, and how they had sort of adapted. It was an amalgamation of their Native American voices with it's very, very interesting. And that goes along with taming. It's an uncomfortable choice of words, but that's.
Well, it's intentional to some extent though, because there definitely was a mission of civilizing.
Right.
And I use that in quotes, right? Because it definitely is also trying to replace native culture with European culture. Right. And they didn't have a lot of respect for native culture. Right. That did come later. Like by the end of the 19th century, there are people who are looking to Native American culture as like some kind of a beacon of authenticity or whatever. But
this Duran guy, it seems like he did. It says that I'll find it for you too. But he did respect our culture, but he was still forcing upon them his own system. This is better because this is what we know, and this is educated.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
And that happened with the slaves as well.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the slaves, their African religious traditions were basically stamped out very consciously. And they were, there was some debate about whether they should be sort of Christianized, but eventually that was the decision. And for whatever reason it took, So, so that's another example of that. There weren't so many attempts to civilize the slaves because they didn't believe that was desirable or possible in some cases. Okay, so that's a good example. What's another example of civilizing and teaching through music? Music education people. You might have caught a name in here that is very important to the history of music education.
Lowell Mason.
Lowell Mason, yes. Who was he and what was he all about?
Well, he was from Boston, and he saw the relationship between people and their music, and specifically in a congregation, you have a lot of community building using music, and he wanted that community to be in the public as well. So he started music education in Boston in the 1830s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, 1830s.
Like instrumental in music education becoming normal for everybody.
Yeah,
like
he is the sort of foundation of music education for the public schools in the United States. Okay. So that's another effort. And when he went to sell this to the Boston School Board, he sold it not on the inherent value of music, but on the value of music as a way to make kids behave. That was sort of how he went and sold it. He said, if I teach these kids how to be in a choir, they'll pay attention. they'll be good citizens. You know, they'll learn to work together and so forth. So he and also by the way, they'll be doing music. But you know, that was not the focus of his pitch to the Boston School Board. Talks about in the chapter. It talks about his collection, the Handel and Haydn Society collection, which is very intriguing. And I don't know if anybody happened to look that up, but the let's see. Why am I not? Oh, okay. See what I can do. Hold on 1 second here. Just gotta sign in with something. Yeah, that'd be my guess.
I think it's press ensemble. Which they kids have more than 5 people.
But the point is that
It's like it's just 25 parts to get more people playing. Yeah, it's for monsters or something.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll just take a brief look at this collection that Lowell Mason published, which is available online. And here's the title page for it. This gives you a few things. You can see a few things about it. So the Boston Handel and Haydn Society collection of church music. A selection of the most approved psalm and hymn tunes, anthems, sentences, chants, etc., together with many beautiful extracts from the works of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and other eminent composers, harmonized with 3 and 4 voices with a figured bass for the organ and piano forte, and yet there's more. So the title, they like long titles in the 19th century. This is the 9th edition, already in 1830, and he'd only started publishing it maybe 10, 15 years prior to that. So this was an enormously popular book, and people bought this for their choirs. This was like getting a single book that had all the choir music you would need to satisfy your choir for a number of years, right? So that's what this is. And there's some preparatory material here, but I wanted to show you the introduction to the art of singing. So if you were not a skilled musician already, you could learn a fair amount just from the preface to this book. So if you're a singer, it tells you some things like, you know, how to read music and tells you how to do some basic solfege. It talks about clefs and all this kind of stuff. So there's quite a bit of information here, and you could use that to teach your choir if they were not. It's all done in these kind of funny questions. You know, so of what use is solmization? That is a question that music students have been asking for for decades in their sight singing theory classes, right? Why do we have to do solfege? It enables the underperformer to utter a sound with fullness and freedom and assists him to secure a correct intonation.
This looks like a church thing too. It looks like the question and answer thing is like the catechism.
Oh, yeah.
Or that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Like,
it is kind of like
what's
the
the chief
catechism.
end of man? You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of that, and then eventually we get to the actual pieces. And well, there's a few exercises here. And the first one is perhaps the most famous piece of church music in the Protestant history, which is Old 100, Psalm 100. And the melody is where? Where's the melody? You can
It's in the tenor part, or it's not the treble, whatever they're calling treble.
Yeah, it's in the treble part down here, which is what we would probably think of as the tenor part. Be thou, O God, exalted high, and as thy glory fills the sky, so let it be on earth displayed, till thou art here as there obeyed.
So it's Old 100 melody, but not Old 100 words.
No, I guess not.
That's interesting.
The thing about these tunes, though, is that once you know one long meter tune, you could sing any psalm that is written for long meter. And it was typical to take the psalms and put them into, you notice there aren't a lot of words here. So you could probably have the words be separate once they learn this tune, so it has a lot of those kind of psalm tunes that every church choir would have been capable of singing. Yeah.
Is there another name for that, like for a different religion or sort?
Sometimes you hear it called the doxology.
Doxology, thank
Yeah.
you.
That's not the words to the doxology. The doxology is praise God from whom all blessings flow. That is the doxology. But this is the tune that's used for the doxology in a lot of that as well. Yeah.
That makes sense. I just caught it because it was the Maslaka Fourth Symphony.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
He's very religious, so that ties in.
All right, so here's an example of the kind of thing that he did a lot of in this book. So do you see this one here on the top, which is labeled as Bowen? It's also long meter, so it has the same meter as the other ones, but it's listed as by Haydn. So what he did, he took tunes from Haydn, not even from, sometimes from secular pieces, sometimes from symphonies or minuets or other things, and he set them in this church style. So the tune is probably Haydn, the harmonization may not be Haydn's, and the words are definitely not Haydn's. But you could use this now as a hymn tune, and there are a number of these kinds of things that became standard hymn tunes in that way. Let's see this one. Up to the fields where angels lie, and living waters gently roll. Fain would my thoughts ascend on high, but sin hangs heavy on my soul. Something like that. I don't know where that comes from in Haydn, but if you look through enough of these, you'll see melodies that you'll sometimes recognize. There's one by Pleyel. He's a Austrian composer. Here's one by Mason himself. And I don't know that one, but where is German? Germany, somewhere in here, by Beethoven. Find that. Duke Street, that's this is a tune that's still sung a lot today. Lord, when thou didst ascend on high, 10,000 angels filled the sky. Those heavenly guards around thee wait, like chariots that attend thy state. That's a tune that's in a lot of hymn books. Not with those words, but.
May I just say that it's very interesting that they're capitalized, because that's, of course, if we go to a tune book like we learned in bibliography, that's the name of the tune, so it already had a name to the tune.
Yeah.
Like and that's the capital, the all caps.
Yeah.
And then it's by whatever it's very interesting. I mean, just that was already a sort of thing, a standardized tune name.
And that comes from this idea of singing psalms to multiple psalms to one tune. You know, so what's the tune? Well, the tune is Duke Street. Oh, I know Duke Street from these other. Well, here's my new words to go with Duke Street.
Right.
And then it's easy to, you know, because it's relatively harder to memorize tunes and relatively easy to read lyrics. You know, so
Great.
ABCs and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Contrafacta is the technical term for that, right?
Okay.
A contrafactum is a new set of words to an old melody. Yeah. So there's a lot of those in here. Anyway, so there's one by Pergolesi, right? So these various European composers. So these tunes have a classical pedigree, even if they are, you know, basically just church tunes. And that's one reason why he was able to sell so many. There's Germany. You might recognize this one. Softly the shade of evening falls, sprinkling the earth with dewy tears, while nature's voice to slumber calls, and silence reigns amid the spheres. I'm not sure that's by Beethoven.
I don't know. I don't think
I
it's
just
sung.
I think it's by Mozart. Anyway,
Yes, it is by Mozart.
it's not by Mozart?
Yes.
Isn't that from Magic Flute?
No,
No, it's
but
not.
I do believe it's by Mozart.
No.
I think it's Mozart. Anyway, he may have gotten that one wrong, but you know, it doesn't really matter. If you saw it was by Beethoven, they were likely to think it was, you know, cultured and therefore sing. So anyway, this is the original ethos of classical music in the United States. It was church music based, and it was religion, you know, but not without this classical imprimatur of Handel and Haydn and so forth. Okay, stop sharing that for a moment. What was the relationship between European and American music in the 19th century? That's one of the questions I had. Did anybody have an answer to this besides Julianne? So she's answered a few questions already.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Justin, was that something that you could answer for us?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So I'm reading from the questions that are in the assignment for this week, by the way. If anybody wants to follow them, that's where I'm at. What was the relationship between European and American music in the 19th century? So we actually just see an example of it with this book, but can you say a little more about it?
Well, I also looked this week. I looked through William Fry and some of this stuff going on early on.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that a lot of times European and American music, there was kind of a big divide at the time. And you have the people who claimed to be the educated people and would bring the European music over and be like, oh, only us are the musicians because we know true music. And you have the American people or the singers and those people who are doing this kind of music. And they looked at those people as the lowly, uneducated peoples who have no idea what music actually is.
Yeah. So there's kind of a snob effect going on.
Yeah.
I think, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what was going on in the 19th century that the music was, it's not going down literally, but in Europe, it was losing its, what do you say, spark?
Music was?
Yeah, at the end of it wasn't like the people moved from Europe to the United States and all of this legacy was coming slowly to the midst of the 20th century. So this was like, this scale was going up slowly. So it took them time.
In America, it took them time to build up a music.
To take all of this legacy, it moved.
Yeah.
The legacy moved from Europe to America. This
Okay.
is why European came to America in the early 20th century because they couldn't find job as musicians in Europe itself. They came to America to play in orchestras and be conductors and teachers, right?
Okay. So a lot of musicians would have been immigrants
Yeah.
in the 19th century.
Yeah.
and a lot of German immigrants actually, especially during the middle part of the century. There were a lot of German immigrants who came over and were bringing German music culture. In fact, even Anthony Philipp Heinrich, he wasn't German, he was Czech, but he was probably German speaking, and he came over and kind of brought his tradition and then tried to develop it further in this country. So it's definitely the case where people saw Europe as like where culture lived, and Americans were either trying to build up their own or trying to imitate European culture or bring it over here. So we can see that with this, where he's adapting European culture for American ideas, but it's important that it comes from Beethoven and Handel and Haydn and not just America.
This wasn't so much in the reading that we did for this week, but thinking back on like regular history classes, I remember stuff about how people were rejecting like the European influence because they were in America now. And did that happen a lot with the music? Because I don't remember like a whole lot. I mean, they're changing the words to Beethoven things and Haydn things, so it doesn't really seem that way.
I mean, I think on the maybe on some levels they rejected it, but by and large in classical music they were definitely still very accepting of the European tradition. And there weren't that many composers who had an identity aside from the European tradition. So I think a lot of it was geared toward, can we reproduce this music in America the way that we're used to hearing it in Germany or London or wherever? Seems to be more of the focus. I mean, later on in the 20th century, you get a lot more people that are saying, no, we need to have our own tradition. We need to reject European influence and do something totally different. But in the 19th century, it's much more still kind of a colonial view. Music comes from there, and we're making it in that same way. Now, the original kinds of music in America were things like minstrelsy, things like the parlor song, different kinds of dance music that did branch off and have their own identity, but not so much in classical music. Okay, let's see what else. What was the state of the opera and the symphony in 19th century America? Do we have them? What was going on with that, Seth?
I think, there were opera houses all over these little towns everywhere, but they were, I don't think they were that great.
Yeah, and they weren't really opera houses either.
Yeah, they were just called opera houses.
Right. In sort of the same way that you call, an airport smoking room a lounge. It's just a crappy room with some chairs in it. You call it a lounge, it sounds a lot better.
For instance, a few that I know of are built on the second floor of other buildings.
Yeah.
Which is a really dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
But
if you have a fire or something like that, or getting people in and out, it's harder.
I might be getting confused with some of the reading, but I think what I read was that going to these things was more of a pompous, look at me kind of thing, where you don't even really pay attention to what's going on. You just dress up and go. Look at me.
There definitely were opera houses in New York, and in the flashy cities. Pardon me?
Can I chime in for a second?
Yes, please do.
So I thought it was interesting. One specific quote about the opera in America is that the opera, a kind of xenophobia is apparent in the comment of a New York reporter from 1844. The opera, the ballet, the act of drama are all abominations maintained by foreigners and imported into this country by foreigners. And I think that's kind of how people viewed it still. Because even if you look at the beginning of this section, America at the Opera, it literally states, like most classical music in the United States, opera was mainly an import. So I think that people just kind of viewed it as this foreign entity, so it was hard for them to digest what they were looking at during this time.
Yeah, so it was maintained as almost like a European thing that was being imported into the country. And in some cases, it really was European troops. A lot of Italian companies did come to the United States and put on operas. As early as even in the 18th century, they were doing that.
Natasha?
I was gonna say, probably, that issue would probably hark back to the language barrier too. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're sitting here listening to an opera in Italian and English is what they speak, you know? So there's like,
Yeah.
well,
Now,
you know,
the thing about that though is that in New York, by mid-century, there's a lot of Italians.
true.
And, contrary to what some people seem to believe, not all immigrants immediately start speaking English.
Yeah.
And that was as true in the 19th century as it is in the 20th and the 21st century, right? So there was an Italian opera house in New York, and they only did operas in Italian. If they did Wagner, they translated into Italian. There was a German opera house in New York also. So the German speakers, of which there were many in New York, could go to that opera house and hear things in German. So there was that. I mean, I think the people who were English speakers, tended to also go to opera in foreign languages. But so there was that. Julian.
Well, it's just later on, we're going to talk about these other composers, and there was tremendous pushback against composers who wanted to compose in English.
Yes.
And so that's a whole different angle.
And if you think about that, even today, how many operas can you name in English? Now, you guys don't count. The singers don't count. But how many operas can the sort of average, even the average musician name in English?
Tenderland?
The Tenderland, you remember that. Amal and
Yeah.
Amal. How many others
I didn't mean
can we name? Nixon in China, Einstein on the Beach. Okay, so we've got a few.
I don't know anything.
You've never heard of any of them.
So yeah, I never heard of them.
No, I mean there are, especially in the 20th century, there start to be many operas in English, and a lot of the great American composers have written operas: Bernstein, Barber, Samuel, Carlisle Floyd, people like that have all written operas, but there's just not. They haven't caught on the way that even opera in Italian and German is prominent. So if you look at the schedule for the Met for this year, I'll bet I didn't check this, but I'll bet that there aren't more than 2 English language operas in the 30 or so that the Met will be doing this year, and that's about typical. And you'd think, wow, that's strange. Even in 2016, when virtually nobody left in New York. I mean, there aren't large communities of Italians or Germans left in New York, but we still do opera in the original languages, and there still aren't that many English language operas to be had. So anyway, yeah. So Gavin, are you having troubles? Because I see that you're hopping on and off. Can you hear me? Maybe not.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just listening intently.
Okay. No, I didn't mean you had to chime in. I just meant I saw that you were hopping on and off. I didn't know if you were having a problem that I could help you with. So anyway, okay. So that's something. What about the symphony? Were there symphonies in the United States? And what are they like? What can we say about them?
I remember reading somewhere about the symphonies that, forgive me, I can't remember who it was. I read so much. There was someone received some flack because they only wanted to write 3 movements as opposed to the standard 4 movements, and it's like, oh, you're not sticking to the European way. And so I know there were some issues with logistical aspects of the symphony like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think isn't that Fry that
Yes,
we're talking about?
Okay, thank you.
Which we'll get to him in more detail, but yeah. So there was the New York Philharmonic, but they mostly wanted to play the European classics, and Fry and Bristow actually had long arguments with the New York Philharmonic about playing American music, and they mostly lost. So that was kind of an unfortunate thing. But there were symphonies, and they were playing the European classics just as we had in Europe. Okay. And there's some other people we'll talk about when we get to the individual
individuals that we wanted to cover.
So largely, we're talking about 19th century was a century of symphonies more than it was an opera, right? The symphony.
No, I'd say there were both. There were both. Yeah. There were opera houses in New York. You know, there were 2 or 3 opera houses at a time, sometimes in New York, and a couple symphonies. There weren't so many permanent symphonies until later in the century.
Yeah, it was named by people, like the symphony who plays for this. Symphony I was searching for.
Yeah, there were some of those. There was a symphony, for example, led by Theodore Thomas.
Yeah.
And he had his own private symphony.
Theodore Thomas
and they would tour around,
yeah.
right? And then there was also one by Adolphe Julien, who came from France and then did several tours. There was also one called the Germania Symphony, and they were German musicians who came over and toured around, so there was that. There weren't so many permanent orchestras. The New York Philharmonic was pretty much, the Handel and Haydn Society did have a symphony, so that started in the 1820s, and then in the 1840s you have the New York Philharmonic, but then it's a while. Then it's like 1880s you start getting Boston and Chicago, and in the 1890s then it's a fad and everybody has to have a symphony now. So you get Philly and Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and all these other ones. So okay. So it's going. It's just they're not yet quite so willing to play American music yet. Okay, let's hear about some of these individuals that I asked you to report on, and we can start off with Anthony Philip Heinrich. We already mentioned him, and he fits into this general place. So I guess that's Laura and Alex. You both had something. Unfortunately, it looks like Laura just left. I don't know what happened there. Let me invite her again. I don't know what happened to her. Maybe we'll skip over her for a second. We'll skip over Heinrich for a second. We'll do William Henry Fry instead. So that's Gavin and Justin.
Do you want to put my one-page thing up that I sent you in my email, or do you want me to screen share, or?
If you can screen share it, that'd be almost easier.
Okay, let me see if I can get it to work.
Okay.
Can we see it?
Yep.
All right. So I had William Henry Fry. He was born on August 10th, 1813, and died in December 21st, 1864. He was the son of William Fry, who was the publisher of the National Gazette in Philadelphia, and I misspelled Philadelphia. He, after working with the newspapers and such back and forth under his father, he ended up studying music and composing with a man named Leopold Meigen, I think. He was an ex-band leader from a Napoleonic army over in France. So that's like he came over to America and taught music around where William lived. And I have a list here of some of his major compositions. He had 4 operas, The Christians and Pagans from 1838, Aurelia. Yeah. The Vestal, 1841, Leonora, 1845, and Notre Dame of Paris, 1863. He had a small list of symphonic works. One of my sources said there were 7, but I only found the names of 5. The first and probably most famous being Santa Claus, the Christmas Symphony from 1853. Niagara Symphony from 1854. Child Harold, The Breaking Heart, and A Day in the Country. And the other notable works that he had were sacred choral works, the first being Stabat Mater, an oratorio that he wrote in 1855, and Mass in E-flat from 1864. He was well known as a composer, but probably more well known as a critic from the mid-19th century in and around Philadelphia and New York City. He was the first music critic that was actually employed by a major American newspaper I'm assuming that would be under his father's, the fact that he published it. So
Yeah.
then other notable things here was that Fry was the first person born in the United States that composed a large symphony for a large symphony orchestra, and he first composed a publicly performed opera. So like his opera was the first American composed opera that was performed. He was well known for two of his works that I had already mentioned, Leonora and Santa Claus: A Christmas Symphony. Leonora was an opera that was based on the 1838 play The Lady of Lyons, which was by Edward Bulwer Lytton. The opera was the first grand opera written by an American composer, and it was written for a lady named Anne Child Seguin, who was actually the lead actress at the time who did it. Santa Claus: The Christmas Symphony, which was one of his symphonic works, was most notable for the use of saxophone. He got a lot of criticism for using it because it was an instrument that really hadn't been invented until about a decade before this music came out. So there was a lot of back and forth as to whether or not this should actually be included in a symphonic work. Two other things. The Niagara Symphony. He had some interesting use of instrumentation for the time period. The first part of that being that he used 11 timpani to create the roar of the falls in Niagara. And then he used snare drums for the spray of water. And he used odd sounding chromatic descending scales to reproduce the chaos of the falling water over the cliff there. So he got criticism for that, but at the same time, it was actually well received.
Okay.
Last but not, I have one more. Last but not least, the Notre Dame of Paris. He was very successful with Leonora, but the Notre Dame of Paris, when it came out almost 10 years later, there was a lot of partisan lines drawn as to whether or not people liked it. And it was actually seen that conservatives disliked the sound of the opera and progressives enjoyed it. So there you go.
Okay. Gavin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have some things. I have my paper too. I'm not sure if you want me to pop that up, but I can. Okay, let me see if I can get this to work here.
Justin, if you can stop. Yeah, there we go. All right, there it is. So some of this we've been through, but if you have some other things.
Okay, so yeah, I can add some things that Justin didn't go over. I'll try to make sure that I don't go over anything that he's already said, but if I do, I apologize.
Okay.
He was a music critic, which they said, but he was also a composer and a journalist. One thing that I kind of found funny in my research about him was that he wrote a book titled "Artificial Fish Breeding" in 1858. So I'm sure that was kind of cool. Through some of our readings, I know he was criticized for sounding too European in his compositions, but also criticized for some other things of not being European enough. So he was kind of in like this, I guess, middle ground, I guess you could say. Looking through some of his actual works, I know that he pushed for a lot of American-made music, and he pushed like his fellow countrymen to make American music and to enjoy American music. But really, the only thing that seemed like that was very American of him was the Niagara Symphony.
Yeah.
As I looked through some of like the research that I was reading, it was actually never performed during his time. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but whenever it was going to be premiered, something happened, I guess, where it wasn't able to be played. I don't know if that's true or not, but doing some research, it seemed like that was the case. And one of the things, just looking into it, was that listening to the piece, it was just the passages were so hard. There's that extremely long runs that I guess are supposed to be the falls of the running water and everything. I don't know anybody that could even play that. That was ridiculous. It was just so ridiculous. But the Niagara Symphony obviously was there was a lot of chromaticism used, descending scales, orchestration, and I guess Charles Ives took a lot of influence from William Fry in his piece, The Unanswered Question.
Yes, well, because of the opening of the Niagara piece, I don't know if Ives necessarily knew the piece or if she was just saying that they were similar in the way that they open.
Yeah.
Yeah, they both open very quietly with, sort of this very, very still texture, I think, is the comparison there.
That's it for me.
Okay, great. So just a couple things to note there. The conflict between conservative and progressives, right? We saw that with Brahms versus Liszt and Wagner. And that same kind of conflict also plays out in the United States, where you've got some critics like, there was a man named John Sullivan Dwight, D-W-I-G-H-T. He was a publisher. He had the leading music journal called Dwight's Journal of Music, and published that for many, many years, and was kind of an adherent more of the absolute music side of things, the Hans Slick side of things. So he criticized people like Liszt and people who followed Liszt's ideas like Heinrich did with his programmatic works. So that conflict was going on, and it was maybe even a little bit later, a little bit behind the discussion in Europe, where Europe was becoming more progressive. Like, it took longer for Liszt to be accepted in the United States, took longer for Wagner to be accepted in the United States. And so we were kind of always in this position of following behind what was happening in Germany. Okay, so Laura's back now, so maybe we can talk about Anthony Philip Heinrich.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. My entire computer froze.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't see anything, and couldn't even click on anything, so I don't know.
Okay. Do you have something you want to put up on screen?
I'm trying to get it back right now.
Oh, all right.
It's on my other computer. So I had to switch devices.
Alex, did you send me yours? Yes. Okay. Let me I'll put up Alex's for now, and then we can
okay.
Go for there. Just one. There it is. That's progression, sorry. Okay, there we go. So go ahead and tell us about Heinrich.
Okay, so Anthony Philip Heinrich, he was born in 1781 in Schönbüchel, Bohemia. Is that how you pronounce that?
Schönbüchel, something like that.
Okay. He was the first full-time American composer, full-time quotations. He started composing music at the age of 36 after losing his fortune in an economic crash caused by the Napoleonic Wars, which is unfortunate because the fortune he created was off of a business he inherited earlier on in his life, about 10 years before I believe it was, from the boost. So he inherited a company built it up a bit, was living a nice life, and then it just lost everything.
Yep.
And then built some of it back up and nothing too crazy.
Right.
Not to live on.
Yeah.
He was the most prolific American composer before the American Civil War. Self-proclaimed the loghouse composer, partially due to he made a 700-mile venture through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Kentucky in that area, viewing much of the landscape and some of the untouched terrain, and then eventually settled into a log cabin in Kentucky, where he most was composed. Some of his works include...
These are fantastic titles, aren't they?
Yes. Now my guess is that he has the short title and then what he wants it to say, just so like if people want to write the whole paragraph, it's more.
Maybe so, I don't know.
So it's the Dying of Music in Kentucky, or the Pleasures of Harmony in the Solitudes of Nature.
Which was a collection of songs, basically. It was a book, like a whole book, not just one song. Yeah.
All right. Should I read through the other ones?
Well, I think we can probably read those. I really like the Migration of American Wild Passenger Pigeons.
And the Ornithological Combat of Kings.
Yes.
That's not the same one, that's a different one.
That's a different one, yeah. He did some bird-oriented pieces. Yeah, so the Ornithological Combat of Kings is supposed to somehow represent, birds of prey fighting in the air and such like, so very programmatic pieces. And they're quite odd and unusual.
I was gonna say, does it sound like that?
Well, it kind of does and it doesn't really,
That's sound, right?
It's
For its time, yeah,
I
like
would think so.
not really.
something like, yeah, I think that's probably how you would say it. Right.
Okay. He conducted the second performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in the United States. He outlived all of his music contemporaries and wrote orchestral memorials to Beethoven and Mendelssohn. He had very successful European tours, but struggled immensely with the incompetent pre-war American orchestras.
Mm-hmm.
And since he passed away in 1861, he passed away during the lower end of his career when everything's kind of in shambles because of the war/incompetent orchestras.
Yeah. So, trying to get things going, but maybe not having too much luck. Okay. Laura, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I was able to rescue my file, so.
Okay.
Well,
go ahead. There we go.
Okay. So, I think this is working. Yeah. So, I have the same biographical information, but he was also an amateur violinist and pianist. He was self-taught. And he came to the US in 1805 for a visit and to establish his business in the US. And that was unsuccessful. And I don't know if he went back and then came back to Boston, but in 1811, his inheritance was destroyed and he couldn't afford to leave the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So he married a Boston native, and after her death was really when he started to make music.
Mm-hmm.
He was chairman of the organizational meeting for the New York Phil in 1842. And I found that kind of interesting because he toured Europe because there wasn't a lot of competent orchestras in the US. So him being in that organizational meeting was a step towards making those orchestras happen.
Yes.
His compositions were descriptive and they connected directly to experiences in his life, whether that was his trip from Philly to Pittsburgh to Kentucky or by just nature. And he also has a piece about the Niagara Falls, which is kind of interesting. He didn't say much about it. The War of the Elements and the Thundering of Niagara, inspired by Niagara Falls.
Indeed, yes, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. Okay.
So.
All right.
I
So
never heard
that's-
of him. So that was
Yeah, I mean, he's not somebody whose music gets played very often. He's more somebody who gets cited as being a pioneer in music in America. But some of the music is interesting, and there are a few recordings of it. Occasionally, people will try and play it. I mean, one of the difficulties with composers like this is to know: is it just that their style is really different, or is it that they weren't any good? Right? I mean, that's one of the hard things about composers who are not in the canon. We know what Beethoven's supposed to sound like, right? And so if we're presented with another Beethoven work that we don't know, we can say, oh yeah, that's a good Beethoven work, or that's an okay Beethoven work, or whatever. But when we hear a piece by a composer we've never heard of, and we don't really have a frame of reference too much for this composer, then we're going to probably evaluate them like against Beethoven, just as what happened with the symphony composers in the 19th century, right? That they would have to have their symphony played right before the Beethoven Fifth, and then people would compare the two, and that was often very unfair. So was Heinrich a great composer? I mean, I think if you listen to some of his music, it lacks a certain sense of organization and clarity that, maybe would be helpful, but also we're just not used to it, and we're maybe not used to what he was trying to do. So it's kind of a hard question to answer. All right, let's move on to another little presentation thing here. And I think the next person is George Bristow, and Don and Kylie, I think, are going to talk.
I think I'm on my own today.
I think you're on your own. We don't have Don with us at the moment.
All right, I will try and screen share as well.
These three composers are all kind of related in that they were in the New York area, and they were trying to do the traditional composer thing, to write symphonies, to write operas, to write big classical works.
Can you see it?
You can.
Awesome. All right, I'll zoom in a little. Okay, he was a little, probably like most of the other ones, it was a little bit difficult to find a lot of information on him. But he was born and raised in the United States in Brooklyn, New York, in 1825. Died right before his birthday. His father was he was a musician locally, conducted, he was a clarinetist, and he gave him lessons. At this point in time, at his in his younger years, or what would be college years, there wasn't really any universities or any colleges kind of dedicated to music. So he kind of, so he jumped around to different, just like private lessons and so on and so forth. So he did have some conducting gigs. It mentioned in one article that it was funny how it read. It said, I want to read as it stated it because it was kind of funny. Where is it? Oh, it says, when he was 13, he joined a theater orchestra, actually a sextet. So put like orchestra in quotation marks. So it wasn't a very large orchestra, but that was kind of his first professional, when he started working professionally. From there on, he was one of the first people in the first violin section of the New York Philharmonic. That was the second season, so they didn't have a violin section, I guess, until the second season. Am I correct on that? So I thought that was kind of interesting. Later on, he became a concert master of the New York Philharmonic. You can see between 1850 and 1853. Kind of the same thing as some of these other American composers. He didn't quite have the American style. He didn't necessarily have. He was more imitating Mendelssohn, more German. He kind of didn't create that American composition style. However, he was a big advocate for American classical music, and along with Fry and Heinrich, he was helping form American schools of composition, even though his models were highly based upon German composers.
Yeah.
He was a music educator. In 1854, he became a music educator in the New York public schools, and he did a lot of freelance work on the side because there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for performing at this point, besides the New York Philharmonic. So some compositions, I found that you can see my whole screen, right?
We can see. Yeah, I think so.
Like you can see this now, like on the webpage?
We can.
Okay. So I found this, this is IMSLP, and you can see all his works. So this was a nice site to kind of check out everything he had. And you can see that like some are unsure. And that there was a lot of that popping up as I was researching. And even as you had mentioned in our assignment, there is no good recording of the Niagara Symphony that we could listen to, which kind of bothers me. I just want to listen to it. I want to hear it.
Yeah, I don't know why there isn't, because his works, other of his works are recorded. I'm surprised that somebody has it recorded.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. So some of the, and I was reading a lot of like kind of debates on how many symphonies he actually has. Are they numbered? Did he number them? And are they missing some? So that was kind of interesting, kind of just stuff I was reading about it. They kind of suggest dividing his compositional periods up into 3 groups: the early, middle, and late years. The earlier starting with more instrumental pieces, but as he went on, he's more known for his choral and orchestra works, which were more in his later years, after he was done with the New York Philharmonic. So some down here, I didn't even put any notable composition from his early years. But the one we were supposed to listen to, Symphony in F sharp minor, Rip Van Winkle, I think we can all say we've at least heard of that. I've heard of Rip Van Winkle at least. And I thought the Ode one was interesting, with the soprano solo, a women's choir, and the orchestra. And then, of course, the Niagara Symphony that we talked about, that we're going to talk about, right?
Mm-hmm. So Rip Van Winkle's an opera, and I've never heard any of it or seen any of it. I'm sure it's been done, but I don't, there again, if some enterprising opera house wanted to make a first recording, they'd certainly do that.
Sorry, I wanted to see you when you were talking, just to have it to click it. But yeah, so even though his music style was more German-based, he did, he took a lot of inspiration more from like American scenes, such as the story of Rip Van Winkle and the Niagara, the Great Republic, those things. He was more American in that kind of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so American subjects, if not American style.
Right. Oh, and one other little tidbit, Jenny Lind, who was mentioned in our reading, he conducted one of the ensembles that accompanied her between 1850 and 1851, which is kind of a good that I missed.
Yeah, and that's a good opportunity to point out that a lot of Europeans came to the United States and did concert tours, which was actually something that maybe made it harder for Americans to become virtuosi and to get that kind of work, because you've got Jenny Lind coming over, and she's this great genius from abroad, and she comes over and P.T. Barnum puts on this huge concert tour for her. She makes tremendous amounts of money. So there's that. Thalberg, who battled with Liszt and was in the Hexameron that we listened to earlier. Thalberg did a tour of the United States. Von Bülow did a tour of the United States. So having these European musicians come over, that was like the real thing. And everybody could say that's the real thing. And then these Americans are kind of like, well, that's the substitute for the real thing. So that is another thing that maybe hampered the development of an American style of music. Okay, thank you very much, Kylie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The next person to talk about then is Louis Moreau Gottschalk, who is, I think, one of the more original and interesting 19th century American composers, and whose music does get performed a little bit at least by pianists today. So can you tell us about Gottschalk? And do I have a handout or something that I should be posting? You're gonna read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to? I'm sorry, but can you move up here to this front row so that you're right by the microphone so people can hear you who are online?
Louis Maru Gottschalk was an American composer and pianist, best known as a virtuoso performer of his own romantic piano works. He spent most of his working career outside of the United States. Gottschalk was born in New Orleans. His father is from London and a Creole mother. He has 6 brothers and sisters. Gottschalk left the United States and sailed to Europe at the age of 13 as he and his father realized classical training was required to fulfill his musical ambitions. He applied to Paris Conservatory. However, the head of the piano faculty rejected his application without hearing him. Commented, "America is a country of steam engines."
America is a country of steam engines and not artists,
Yeah.
something like that. Okay. All right. So no good pianist could possibly come from America.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gottschalk gradually gained access to the musical establishment through family friends. After Gottschalk returned to the United States in 1853, he traveled extensively, starting in Cuba during 1854 was the beginning of a series of trips to Central and South America. By the 1860s, Gottschalk had established himself as the best-known pianist in the New World. In May 1865, he was mentioned in San Francisco newspaper as having traveled 95,000 miles by rail and given 1,000 concerts. However,
How many concerts?
1,000.
1,000 concerts, 95,000 miles on rail.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
No.
Doing that and how much that would, the toll that would take on you? I mean, we're not talking about comfortable rail trips in the 19th century either. You know, these are rickety, not that great trips. Yeah.
However, he was forced to leave the United States later that year because of a scandalous affair with students at the Oakland Female Seminary in Oakland, California. He never returned to the United States. Gottschalk chose to travel to South America later, where he continued to give frequent concerts. In 1870, his remains were returned to the United States and were interred at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York.
Ah, buried in Brooklyn. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
What's about the scandal? Explain the scandal again. He got in trouble.
Yes, for having a sexual relationship with a student, an underage student of his.
What's interesting about him is that he was part black and he had traveled freely.
I don't know that he was part black.
His mom was Haitian.
That doesn't mean that she was black.
She was African, don't you think?
Does it say that?
Yes, Creole, right? Our text was page 200, and yeah, she was Creole, so I would think that he.
It's possible. It's possible, but there were both white people and black people in Haiti. But okay, Haitian of French and African descent. So she could have looked fairly white, but had back in the family tree or sort of something like that. And
that's amazing.
I do know that in New Orleans, his father had both a white family and a black family, which was apparently not unusual among white men of a certain class in those days, that they sort of had their official white family in the white part of town, and then they had their black mistress on the side. in the black part of town. So he definitely had like half brothers that were black, you know, or would have been perceived as being more black. But New Orleans was also interesting in that they had these very fine gradations of color, where in the rest of the country, like, you know, in Kentucky or in Virginia, it was, if you were at all black, you were black, right? So you had, I think they also counted, like, I don't know how many white, you know, how white you had to be white, right? Basically you could pass, but, you know, if you had any black heritage, you were black. In New Orleans, they actually had gradations from slaves to what they called colored people, which were basically mixed race people. And then sort of the lighter your skin was, the more rights and abilities you had. You know, so there were people, like the first jazz musicians, many of them advertised themselves as Creoles or colored, as opposed to African or black, because that meant to people in New Orleans, they would have interpreted that as, oh, they're colored people, that's a little higher status than black people.
It's amazing he got around so well.
Yeah, well, I suspect that they didn't make a lot of his African heritage, you know. And if you see pictures of him, he does not look at all African, but you know, that doesn't mean too much, I suppose. But yeah, so his music is really intriguing because it uses this whole variety of different styles, and uses a lot of things from the New World. You talk about music that doesn't sound American, but his actually does sound American, but it sounds American because it uses sort of like Latin ideas or folk song ideas or something like that. In the book, there's that example there, La Gallina, the hen, I believe, and that is supposed to sound Cuban. So it has a Cuban dance, the habanera, just like Carmen does. I'll play a little bit of this La Gallina, Danse Cubaine. So this is for piano by Louis Moreau Gottschalk. And let me switch the screen over here. So it's a very different sound, isn't it, from what you'd expect from 1857. I mean, nobody's writing like that in 1857. That kind of folk style, Cuban, you know, habanera style. Here's another piece. This was maybe his most famous piece during his life. This is called a concert paraphrase on the Union, on the Star Spangled Banner. So this is a piece that he played during the Civil War, and was, you know, a rallying point for that. So I'll play a little bit of that concert fantasy. So that was clearly not the piece that I intended to play. But I let it play. Let it play while I was trying to figure that out. It gives you another sense of what Gottschalk's music was like. He did write a lot of lighthearted, kind of almost salon type music that people played. That was, you know, a dance piece basically. This one I think will in fact be the Union piece. So I'll give it one more shot here. So there you can definitely hear the Liszt influence, right? And it's very virtuosic, and he definitely had all of that ability to do that, and is using it in a very American context here by combining different American national tunes, just as Liszt might have done with like a Hungarian piece or a German piece. So So anyway, that's a little bit about Gottschalk. He also wrote a couple of symphonies, which are also very creative and interesting pieces too. So a really composer worth following up on. He has a fascinating book of memoirs where you can read about all of his various tours and how it was in these different places when he went to give concerts and things. It's a really fascinating look into the American concert world at that time. Okay, let's take a short break and we will get started again in, yes, there is a way. Kylie, sorry about that. No, it wasn't you. I just said I can choose various people. Like we can all look at Jess for a while, or you can look at you or whatever. So sorry about that. Yeah. So anyway, let's take a break, and we'll reconvene in about 6 or 7 minutes. Let's see.
Just keep swimming. Just 5
was gonna ask you something, Asha. I can't
Could
remember
be.
what it was. Sam,
Might be,
Asha, I'm gonna ask her.
Oh,
Did you see me?
Dr. Jennings asked me about have I come to help you out, and I was like,
I was like,
Ned, do you guys have class next week?
Monday and Tuesday. I won't be there Tuesday. I have to take a gambling medical leave for my husband.
yeah,
Just
just that you don't have a chance
just-
to fall into the
He's on warfarin and
trap.
so whenever he has any procedures, we've got this problem potentially overleading. So
Yeah, work from the blood.
So I'm gonna go down, he had to get a heart valve transplant. So
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna, before I met him years ago, but I need just to go down because if he bleeds, he's gonna need another pair of hands. Just, you know, to help. And then plus we're getting ready, yeah.
For Thanksgiving.
I have to look after him and then we'll think about it. So, so next week, not so good. We need to do it.
Mhm. Did you have a concert or something coming up, right?
Yeah,
I saw this little sign in Cafe Amadeus.
Oh, that's for the Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun.
I saw that
too. That's December 10th.
Wait, what's that? That's
Did you go to the first Harry Potter night 2 years ago at Cafe Amadeus? It was a huge success.
We need to go.
Well, this year it's a full day, but the chamber group from Indiana, we call ourselves the Chamber of Strings. You know that after, but we're the Indiana High School Chamber of Strings, and they're playing. Actually, not me. My kids, my students, are playing on December 10th. We're playing from 7 to 8:30. Got some Harry Potter stuff and some other
It's on
stuff.
Saturday.
It's on a Saturday.
I
It's
know.
all day.
I was like, we're going.
Traded in.
And dress.
Traded Chris for a sandwich. You got a pretty good, you got two
We're playing
sandwiches.
Quidditch tomorrow, so I'll be dressed.
That's pretty good.
Harry Potter.
Where's Chris?
There he is.
I had to go touch base with Dr. Elizabeth.
That's okay.
You were playing baseball, you could touch base.
All right, so we have a few more people to talk about here. I think the next one is Patrick Sarsfield Gilmore. I threw this name into there just because I thought he's an interesting character that maybe we should know something about. And especially for those of you who are interested in the wind ensemble and the band. So I think we have Janet and Chris to talk about P.S. Gilmore. Janet's not
Janet
on
had
right
to
now.
jump off because she was in a car in class and she was getting car sick and almost threw up, and she said that she's very sorry and she'll try to join in as soon as she can.
Okay.
So
Okay. All right. Well,
the future is apparently Korea.
apparently. Well, that's fine. You did send her something.
I did. It's in an awful format, so I apologize. But
Well, we'll see what it looks like.
it's information that's in paragraph form. I feel silly.
2 minutes.
Word.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna screen share here for Chris's thing on Gilmore. I'll make this bigger. And so tell us about P.S. Gilmore.
Patrick Gilmore was born in Northeast Ireland. I read the Wikipedia article says that he was born here. There's a scholarly article that says he was born somewhere else. And then the one that I'm going with is no one can pinpoint his exact origin.
Okay.
So, but all of these places, they're like 3 different parts of Northeast Ireland. So I figured I would just.
But definitely in Ireland.
Definitely.
I think that's probably close enough for our purposes.
He was born December 25th, 1929, and died in St. Louis on September 24th, 1892. He lived for over 100 years, I guess.
How many years?
I said 1992.
Oh, I see.
I was making a joke in my.
But you must have corrected it because it's 1892 here.
He started as a cornet player with the Athlone Amateur Band, which, as far as I can tell, is in Canada. He moved to Boston, Massachusetts in 1849. He got a job at a music dealer slash publisher. I only have dealer, they were also a publisher. John P. Ordway. He became the band leader of the Charlestown Band and went on to be the band leader of many other bands, including the Salem Brass Band and Boston Brigade Band. The Salem Brass Band, under his direction, played in the inaugural parade for President Buchanan in 1857.
Mostly known for being the guy that came before a really good president.
Yes. He's kind of frowned upon in history.
Yeah.
The biggest things I could find about him are these concerts. I call them concerts, but the later one is called a festival, and I would consider them all more festivals instead of concerts.
Yes.
That's why I have concerts in quotations. The first one, which was in St. Louis for the inauguration of Michael Hahn as governor of Louisiana, a 500-piece band, a 6,000-person choir, 40 soldiers playing anvils, which I'm not exactly sure why.
I can tell you. I'll tell you in a minute.
Okay. 50 cannons, and he also, I didn't put it in here, I'm not sure why, because it was interesting. He arranged for all of the church bells in the area to be rung at exactly the same time.
So the anvil, have you ever heard of the Anvil Chorus?
Yes.
By Verdi in Il Trovatore. It's bum 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 bum, and while that I'm playing piano, but you should have a anvil that's ringing out there. And it was one of his favorite spectacles was to have all these burly firemen with their axes hitting the anvil in the anvil chorus. So you've got the 6,000 choristers, and then you've got the 40 firemen bringing the anvils for their anvil chorus.
He's a showman.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely a showman.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
These concerts only got larger as time went on. In 1872, he organized the World Peace Jubilee, an international music festival in Boston. I think this was Johann Strauss II.
It was, yes, Johann Strauss Jr.
Which was also known as the Waltz theme.
Yes, the guy who composes Fledermaus.
His orchestra from Austria, the French Grand Republican Band, the
Guard Republican, like the Republican Army or whatever. It's an army band, yeah.
The band of the Grenadier Guards from England, the Prussian band of Kaiser Franz Grenadiers, and the U.S. Marine Band were all involved in this festival. There were numbers, and I'm not sure why I didn't put them in here, but it was very large. And I believe just the band in itself, if I remember correctly, was over 2,000 people as just the band, which combined all of these except the orchestra was not involved in the military bands.
Yeah.
The orchestra did a separate orchestra thing.
Yeah, and they paid Johann Strauss $100,000.
Really?
At the time, I think.
So that was
a lot of money. Yeah, that was a lot of money.
Which I actually had a question about that. How did they transport like string instruments at that time?
On a boat. I mean, you got a lot of room on the steamship. So you crate it up and you or you case it up, you crate it up, you put it on the boat, and there you go.
I feel like that would be bad for it.
I'm sure it could have been, but
I guess there was no other way to do it.
Well, that's how you travel transatlantically at the time. Is you took the steamship. So, and it was probably more like a 2-week trip than a than a 1-week trip or a 8-hour trip like it is now. So yeah.
Okay. In 1873, so the year after that festival, he moves to New York to start with the 22nd Regiment Band. This band, this band was pretty much regarded as the most professional and best band in the United States, from what I can tell from the things that I read. For 18 years, I put almost 2 decades. Gilmore leased the P.T. Barnum's Hippodrome, which was then renamed Gilmore's Garden, which I believe became Madison Square Gardens.
That sounds right.
That wasn't in the article that I read, but it was on Wikipedia.
Okay.
And I couldn't find anything about it in actual articles, so I wasn't sure if I should.
So a large multi-purpose hall in New York City that could be used for a circus or also a giant concert.
Yes. The 22nd Regiment Band performed over 150 concerts there. They also toured Europe in 1876 and also the West Coast.
They were the predecessor of the Sousa Band. Yeah. Okay. They were the Sousa Band, and then when Gilmore died, Sousa was ready to step into his shoes. Sousa left the Marine Band and took his band private and started to do basically what Gilmore had been doing, touring all around by rail and giving concerts in all these little towns and places.
Okay. Some of his more famous pieces include the 22nd Regiment March, Good News from Home, Music Fills My Soul with Sadness, which sounds sad, We Are Coming, Father Abraham, and When Johnny Comes Marching Home.
Yeah.
Which I was like, whoa! I thought that was super cool. And just some things that we should remember him for. He was responsible for some of the largest musical gatherings the United States has seen. He was able to organize other bands and orchestras from around the world to perform and be part of these festivals. He wrote a piece of music that has been with us in our lives for over 130 years, which is When Johnny Comes Marching Home, which I guess also has other music as well. But just a lot of stuff that I didn't know, but I'm definitely glad that I got to research.
Yeah, so pretty interesting figure, and very American, I'd say. These are tunes that were specifically American. They certainly had these brass bands in England and Germany and other places too. And yet this was probably a more authentically American, route to an authentically American sound than doing the orchestra or any of the classical music we're talking about. The stuff that Gilmore was doing, and he also was much more democratic in his performances. Like he went on tours and went to places that an orchestra would never go and played music that orchestras wouldn't necessarily play. So marches, waltzes, dances, more popular kinds of things, songs. So significant figure in American music. Okay, and who else is next? Oh, so Theodore Thomas is next. So Nashwan and Aja.
I sent you the.
Okay. I will look for that.
I think you went here.
It was so long ago, 5 minutes before the
I got it.
5 minutes before the class.
Okay, so Theodore Thomas, go ahead.
So Theodor Christian Friedrich Thomas was born in Essen, Germany, in October 11th, 1835. So he was from an artistic family, musician family. When he was 10 years old, his father, who was a violinist also, and he was leader in many bands or small chamber music groups, they decided to come to the States to look for a better situation or for a job. Since his childhood, he was talented in playing music. He earned his good experience from his father, who taught him, and from his performing in weddings and ceremonies and parties. When they came to the States, they worked. He and his father worked with a Navy band between 1848. Between 1845 and 1848, from 1846 until 1848, I'm sorry, and then his father stopped supporting him. He did not give him financial support, so he became independent, working by himself. He started touring the states as his own. He was selling his tickets, and he was his own manager. And he.
14.
Yeah.
Young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he.
He's only 14.
Yeah. And he toured to the south. He reached Mississippi, And then he came back to the state, to New York City, while he said, I'm gonna go back to Germany to have to learn music properly, more than in the States as he thought. But he stayed there and he started conducting class with Carl Eckert at 1850. Between the 1850 and 1855, he performed as a first violin with many orchestras until he established his own. And I said that piano quartet because I think it's a piano quartet. He was playing chamber music. It was called with his name and the pianist name. It was Theodore Mason Suarez. Is it Suarez?
Okay, that sounds like a soiree is like an evening, like a concert.
Yeah, but it was like there's two first violins, one viola, one violoncello, and one
Okay.
piano.
And that Mason is Daniel Gregory Mason.
William
Mason.
William Mason.
So William Mason, I think, is related to Lowell Mason.
Yeah, maybe.
I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
So between the 1855 and 1862, they did Suarez many places. In the 1862, and after a lot of work in the Thomas or Theodore Mason Suarez, he established the Theodore Thomas Orchestra. In the summer of 1864, they started concerts touring many large cities in the States, including New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, Connecticut. I don't know, Connecticut is a state or
It's a state.
It's a state, Connecticut. At 1877, between 1877 and 1878, he was the director of New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Then in 1889, there was a businessman. His name is Charles Norman Fay. He invited him, and he was like, I don't know if admire of his work or he was supporting music, and he invited him to come and work in Chicago. And he had a lot of support from this man. And as I remember, he asked him, as I read, he told him, if we give you a permanent orchestra, would you come to Chicago? He said, I will go to hell if you give me a permanent orchestra.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because most orchestras weren't permanent. Even the New York Philharmonic for many years was only partly professional, and there were also amateurs in the New York Philharmonic. So, a fully professional permanent orchestra was a dream that a lot of people had.
He performed what we say in English. He introduced several new works to Chicago audience, including Anton Bruckner, Dvorak, Elgar, Edvard Grieg, Massenet, and Smetana, Tchaikovsky, and his favorite friend Richard Strauss, who became the orchestra's first guest conductor after he invited him. That was in 1904. One of the things I saw also, he has a monument. There's a monument of his name in Chicago, and he's considered as the first American conductor in the American history, as like a real conductor. And he died in Chicago in 1905, and he was buried. They buried him in Massachusetts. This is what I have about him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? You worked with
Aja
on that? Okay.
No.
No? Oh, all right.
No, well, pretty much what I had to say about it was some of the things about his touring. He was pretty much like the pioneer that started that. Like, that wasn't a thing, not just the permanent orchestra thing, but touring orchestras. So he had his own touring orchestra, and through, I guess, the experience, people were hearing about it, kind of like that word of mouth kind of thing, and that's how he was offered the job in Chicago and stuff like that. But he also established he helped establish the Brooklyn Philharmonic, which isn't around anymore, but that was a thing back then. And what else did I want to say about his life's work? The first Cincinnati May Festival. So he wanted to kind of have his outdoor musical festival, kind of like something we would see today, but for rock and roll, but he wanted to do it for classical and chamber works. Wasn't very successful because of the conditions. So
Financial
I would
conditions,
imagine, you know, if you think about your instruments outside and it's hot, you know, in the middle of the, you know, they don't have AC, right? So it would be pretty challenging to think about that. But so it wasn't very successful, but that was kind of like a kind of look into what we are going to start doing, you know, with music festivals and stuff like that, which they still do. We still do classical music festivals, you know, it's pretty common, but it's quite a pioneer when it came down to that kind of stuff.
The May Festival were eventually successful. I don't know if they were not successful, like when, did you say he started the May Festival, or he was just a performer?
Yeah,
there,
like he was a like performer there, and it was quite, it was a little bit of a challenge for him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as accepted, if you will. Like it was starting out, you know, he was kind of like helping to pioneer and kind of push it forward.
Okay.
But it wasn't as successful as maybe what we would see today.
Okay.
So, in that sense.
So there's a common thread there between Cincinnati, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. These are all cities with a large German population, and they were a big part of why those orchestras started there. So the Cincinnati May Festival had a very German character to it. They had large groups of men's choirs, for example, that sang at it, and that was a popular thing in Germany. So things along those lines. Yeah.
I looked at this book about him in the library. I don't know if we have time. It's autobiography.
Oh yeah, he published an autobiography.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a lot.
Probably we need to move on, but like the Boston Symphony and the Chicago Symphony both had this situation where they were essentially started by one person who put up all the money for it, and that was unusual. I mean, Pittsburgh was a bunch of different people putting up the money, although mostly Andrew Carnegie. So the orchestra didn't necessarily make money, and it never has made money. It's always been the situation that orchestras had to fundraise, had to get donors, and that they don't necessarily support themselves with ticket sales. Thomas was probably doing that when he was doing his touring with his own orchestra. Maybe he was able to do that, but in a city it was much harder. And yet people wanted to have these orchestras. It was a point of civic pride to say, we have an orchestra. And that was a big thing, like in Pittsburgh. They really wanted to say, we have an orchestra and it's good. That was something they could hold up and say, we're a real city because we have an orchestra.
It's still that way.
It is still that way. It is still that way. Although I don't know that, you have major groups of people in cities clamoring to improve the orchestra. If it goes away, now people clamor for sports stadiums today, right? If you're a real city, if you have an NFL team.
Yeah, and the NFL stadium is a huge. I feel sometimes
even in Pittsburgh
right now.
Yeah, even in Pittsburgh, that's the case, right? They spend,
they're spending so much money.
Lots and lots of money on the NFL. So
they bought a church out to put a new stadium. They bought a church out in Atlanta to put a new stadium in.
Yeah.
No lie, and it's like a historic church.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like
That's
I feel
amazing.
a certain way about that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, so that is Theodore Thomas or Thomas. I suppose you go by Thomas. I always want to say Theodor Thomas because that's how you would say in German his name. All right, so now we have John Knowles Payne is next, and that's Crystal and Julianne. And you probably sent me something.
Yeah, I forgot to put mine. So you got it.
Okay, but Crystal's, I have Crystal, so I'll put that up.
Yeah, and for some reason I don't know why, but I didn't put his major works.
Okay, that's on mine. So if you find mine,
I have.
Now that is some impressive facial hair right there.
Yeah. Okay, so he was the first American-born composer to achieve fame for large-scale orchestral work. He was responsible for a significant collection of concert music by composers from the United States, and he was a member of School of American Musical composition in Boston, and like there were a couple different names for them, like the Boston classicists, Boston Sixth Floor, the Second New England School, and they wrote mostly instrumental work for the concert hall. He was also the first professor of music at Harvard, which I have more detail later, but I just put like some of the main points at the top. But when he was younger, he studied organ, piano, harmony, and counterpoint with Hermann Koltschimar, and
But in the United States, or did he go abroad?
I think that was in.
Well,
I
that
think
was
that was in the United States, and then later he went to Europe.
This is the 1850s.
Yeah, that's when he was. Yeah. Oh, whoops.
That's all right.
Okay, sorry. He completed his first composition when he was 16, and it was a string quartet. His first organ recital was in 1857, and he was appointed organist of Portland's Haydn Society.
Portland, Maine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he gave a series of recitals, and that was his way of like gathering money to fund his trip to Europe so that he could like further his education in music. And when he got to Europe, he studied organ with Carl August Haupt and orchestration with Friedrich Wilhelm Liebrecht.
Very nice.
In Berlin. He toured Europe for 3 years and established a reputation as an organist before returning to the United States. And when he returned, he settled in Boston in 1861, and he was appointed Harvard's first university organist and choir master. And he offered free courses in music appreciation and music theory, and then that became the core curriculum for their academic music department, and it was the first in the US. And then that was when he was America's first music professor, and he remained a member until the year before he died.
Wow. More than 40 years, I guess, he was on the faculty there. Yeah, enterprising guy, I guess. You'd think, well, there's no courses in music now, but if I offer some, maybe there'll be a demand for it, and then maybe Harvard will start offering them full time to pay me to do it. So that was good thinking on his part. And so you say you left off his major works.
I have one.
You have one yours.
Yeah.
So I'll let you put that one up.
What I thought was interesting about him is that he gave lectures, and he really was a person who wanted people to be able to learn about music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He made great efforts to do that, which is why that led to him being the very first music educator or music professor in America.
Yeah.
And then he had all this pushback for so many things, but one of the things he had pushback from was the librarian at the school at Harvard didn't want them to have a music department. So every time they ended a lesson, this department guy would say "Musica delenda est," which is taken from the Rome versus Carthage conflict, and it means music should be eliminated. It used to be Carthage should be eliminated.
Yeah.
And so that's where and every time anybody had a meeting, this guy would stand up at the end of the last word. Was the last word. So
Wow.
talk about getting beat up for being a music educator.
Wow.
I mean, he really was. And he was a founding member of the AGO, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So he started a lot of neat things. And then these are his works, and his style of music changed mid career, and he got beat up for that too. But his early pieces are more classical, modeled after Bach and the Viennese classicists, and then so he wrote his first work, St. Peter Oratorio. He went to Europe and he performed it there, conducted there. So at first, people in America didn't even know who he was, but people in Europe all knew his music. And then he came back, and of course he saw all of his pieces performed during his lifetime. He had that opportunity, which not everybody did.
Yeah.
So, and then, so these are and it was interesting to see, I found some comments on these different pieces that he wrote. For example, the earlier was the classical form, and then they became Symphony No. 2. He got a lot of pushback because it was programmatic.
Yeah.
And then Oedipus Tyrannus, thematic transformation, cyclic construction, chromaticism. He was doing what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah, the 1880s, that's when Liszt's tone poems started to really have an influence. And if you were on the progressive side of things, then you wanted to do that. And Edward McDowell is another name from this period. He studied with one of Liszt's students around that time and came back to the United States and started composing in that style too. So, Seth, have you got to go right now?
I have a few minutes.
You have a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just get
I think, because we should be able to get to Chadwick right quick before you go, if you don't mind.
Yes, that's fine.
So, okay, yeah, so he and Chadwick are in kind of the same basket, and also Beach, so maybe we'll just continue on with them, and we'll get a little bit more in the same vein here, right? How about Chadwick?
Okay. I think I had this energy that she has something better than I do, that she should put hers up.
You sent me yours, Seth?
Yes, I did.
Okay, here it is.
Oh man, that's tight.
Well, I can make it bigger.
Okay. So George Whitefield Chadwick. He was born in rural Lowell, Massachusetts, which I believe is pretty close to Boston. I think I looked that up. And he grew up in a very musical home. His brother taught him, some places say piano, others say organ. And the beginnings of his harmony learning. And then he, by some accounts, dropped out of high school to go work at his father's insurance company. And meanwhile took lessons at the New England Conservatory, not as an actual student, but as like a special student, whatever you want to say. And that was in 1872. He went to Germany to continue his musical study with Karl Reinecke at Leipzig's Royal Conservatory in 77. Became an instructor of harmony and composition at New England Conservatory, even though I believe he never got a degree, in 1882. And he was also the organist at South Congregational Church in Boston. Some of the American composers that he influenced directly were Horatio Parker, William Grant Still, Henry Hadley, E.B. Hill, Daniel Gregory Mason, and Frederick Converse. He became the director of the conservatory in 1897 and made a more respectable music school by adding an opera workshop and a student orchestra, by making curriculum changes to reflect European conservatories, such as using actual music to study harmony and orchestration rather than just abstract principles, which is what we do now. And he was a very much in demand conductor. I believe he also started a few music festivals in the Massachusetts area. What else about him that I didn't write down? I can't remember. He has a few notable pieces from the different. They gave him like Beethoven. They gave him eras of composition, or periods of composition. One of his most important ones, I guess, is the Rip Van Winkle Overture. It was his first orchestral work that established his claim to fame in Europe and America. That's why that would be important for him, I guess. And symphonic sketches, I couldn't find out exactly if this is the one, but it was part of a group of works that had some really weird orchestration, weird for the time, like big percussion batteries and long brass solos and saxophone. So it's important for that reason. And then Tam O'Shanter Overture was kind of a programmatic piece.
Yeah, basically a symphonic poem.
Yeah, some funny poem. Yeah.
Here's another really lovely one called Aphrodite.
Yeah. And why he is so important to us, he is one of the leading figures of the second New England school, along with Horatio Parker, Amy Beach, and Edward Bell. His compositions were based in his German teaching, but exhibited and helped to grow a distinctly American style, and I think his direction of the New England Conservatory influenced how we teach music at a higher education level in America.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much the model of a conservatory today. So, yeah, I mean, what you can see with all these composers, though, is how much they were still indebted to the European models, and they still were chasing that in a lot of ways, even though they're now trying to do things in America or trying to establish American music on a higher level and so forth. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good rehearsal.
We'll try.
And that just leaves us with one other composer, and that is Amy Beach. And Carolyn and Jess.
Yeah, so we tag team this one. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely okay.
Great. So let me just screen share quick. Entire screen.
Oh, that's cool.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so Amy Beach was born in New Hampshire in 1867 and passed in 1944. She was an American composer and pianist in Boston and New York. She was considered a child prodigy. She composed her first piece when she was 4 years old. And she's known as and recognized today as the first major female composer of large-scale concert music in the United States, which this was difficult at the time because she was trying to find acceptance in a primarily male-dominant field. She was the youngest member of the Boston Classics, or they call it the Second New England School Conservatory. She believed that American composers should base their music on their own heritage, like Old English, Scotch, or Irish songs, much like Dvorak's thinking. In 1885, she married physician Dr. Henry Beach, and he actually urged Amy to limit her public performances to once a year and donate all of the proceeds to charity. And this allowed Amy to focus on composing, which selfishly for us, it was a good thing because we get to hear all of her great music, but it did limit her performances. And
why didn't he want her to perform?
Sorry?
Why didn't he want her to perform?
I believe he thought that it was a woman's job to not do that. Is that,
okay.
am I on the right track?
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Okay.
I feel like she was in a similar position as Fanny Hensel. Like it was just difficult for her to break out of that stereotype.
Yeah.
And her husband was a doctor, so they obviously were living comfortably and had higher status or whatever. So that probably made it even harder for her.
Yeah, women of her class just did not have jobs outside of the home. You just didn't do that, and it would have been seen as, I don't know, somehow embarrassing to the husband if the woman had to work or did work. The woman was supposed to be in charge of the home sphere and taking care of that while the man was out doing his job all day. So very, very traditional gender roles, but even more so because of their class, because they were well off. So if she had been poor, having a job would not have been a big deal. Poorer women did work. They worked all the time outside the home. But for an upper middle class woman in Boston society, that was not really acceptable.
Gotcha. Okay, so after her husband passed in 1910, she resumed her performance career, particularly internationally in Germany. She spent her last summers composing at the MacDowell Colony, and after her death, she left about 300 published works, and additional works have been published in recent decades. So Beach is known for composing symphonic works, choral works, chamber music, solo piano music, and most importantly, songs, which was her most popular, writing approximately 150. And here's some of her noteworthy works. Her Mass in E-flat major, composed in 1892. It was for voices and orchestra, and the critics and listeners loved it. Her Gaelic Symphony in E minor was, I think, one of her most known symphony. Started writing that in 1894, finished it in 96. This one incorporated her Irish folk melodies, which we saw earlier. She believed that was really important. It depicted the sufferings and struggles of the Irish people, and this was the first ever symphony to be written, composed, and performed by an American woman. Pretty cool. In 1896, the A minor violin sonata, the piano concerto in 1899. One of her most popular songs, it's arguably her best known work, was The Years at the Spring from the Three Browning Songs, written in 1900. She also did variations on Balkan themes for piano in 2004, theme and variations for flute and string quartet in 1916, and her first opera, Cabildo, in 1932. So that's it.
Yeah. So I noticed that the compositions, the ones that you mentioned, were clustered toward the beginning of her life, but she had quite, she lived until 1944. Did she slack off in her composing, or is it just that the ones that we tend to talk about are from the early part?
I believe these are just the ones we tend to talk about the most. So
Yeah.
this is what I found as noteworthy. Carolyn, would you agree with that?
Yeah. And like the last 2 summers of her life, she spent at the MacDowell colony, which is a kind of a weird situation in itself. But so she didn't stop composing, is what I mean, like up until the time she died, from what I understand.
Yeah, so she knew the McDowells, and the McDowell colony. Edward McDowell was a composer, and his wife established the McDowell colony as a place for artists to go, composers, writers, and to have time to compose every day while they were there. And a lot of American composers have spent time at the McDowell colony, so she was one of them. Her husband died in 1910, and that was pretty early in her life, relatively speaking. I think they'd only been married for maybe 20 years at the time. She was 40 when this happened, roughly, I think. And after that, she had a little more freedom because she was a widow. So as a widow, you were not expected to be home and doing the big social thing all the time. You had a little more freedom. So she actually went to Europe and started concertizing again. And she also toured a lot more in the latter part of her life, especially to women's clubs. She would go to women's club meetings, music club meetings in all kinds of places around the country, and was really an important part of that part of our musical life. We don't talk about this kind of thing very often, but in addition to the symphonies and the operas and these more public kinds of music making, women's music clubs were really important in this country in terms of like establishing local music. So Indiana had a women's music club. Later on, it was not just women, but early, I think it was mostly women who were involved. And this was something where, teachers, piano teachers, or other women who were interested in music would gather, and they would do things like have scholarships for local kids who wanted to become musicians. And you probably had one.
I won.
You probably got one of those from the Tuesday music.
The
Monday Music Club.
And I would go they would have these club meetings, and we would all go and would play for each other. It was like a departmental, only we were kids.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting. And
it was a big part of American musical life up until
yeah.
recently. I mean, they still kind of exist, but they're not nearly what they were.
Blairsville still has one.
Yeah.
But Indiana's, of course.
Right, but it used to be at one point that was probably a pretty lively group. They probably had 20 or 30, active teachers who were involved in that. So, yeah. So that's one thing she did toward the end of her life, and part of her career that maybe doesn't get talked about as much. I mean, yeah, it's great that she was the first woman to compose a symphony, but that's only one of her contributions. Okay, great. So that's all of our presentations. And then the last thing to talk about is the Niagara article. And I want to show you this amazing picture that you may have seen or may have looked up. There was a really terrible copy of it in the article that we read. So I wanted to at least give you a halfway decent one to look at here in color. It's an absolutely gorgeous painting. And it's also very, to me, very romantic. It especially has the sublime in spades. You know, we talk about idealism, romantic idealism, and we talked about the notion of the sublime. And this is one of those pictures that evokes the sublime, because when you look at this, it just seems like this huge natural thing. And you look off, you know, these clouds that are so far in the distance, and the panorama around the water, and then just this amazing cascade of water, right? The little rainbow that's there curving up, and you know, clouds very far off and very high up in the sky. So just this sense of space and the power of the falls is kind of amazing. And she talks about this picture. She talks about the role of Niagara Falls in American life and American culture as the symbol for America. And then she also talks about the sound of the falls, which I thought was a really interesting aspect of this article. Do you remember what she said about that? Anything stand out to you?
Roar was the word, and they talked about roar, but maybe it wasn't roar. It was
Yeah.
like
thundering or something.
yeah, they gave it
Thundering.
different words since roar wasn't a comfortable word for her for the article.
Well, yeah, she was pointing out that one of the writers about this questioned that it was a roar. But you know, then there are other people who did describe it as a roar. Some people. I think the most interesting one was the guy who described it as a giant musical instrument, and said that it made almost like a chord. You know, that you could hear a pitch from the falls, and that it he was comparing it to organ pipes and trying to figure out like what the length would be of this organ pipe that's created by the falls, and all these kind of cool things. But you know, of course, there's also a downside to the falls. What was the negative aspects of the falls, or things about the falls that maybe were not captured by this picture?
Oh, you mean like the build up that people built a tourist? It's a tourist trap.
It's a tourist trap, right? You've been there. Who's been to the falls?
It's been a long time.
Just a couple people have been to the
Yeah,
falls.
it's like 5.
You were 5.
It's
I remember
been
it.
there.
Who else has been there?
I live pretty close to them.
Oh yeah, okay. So
I've been
two of you
multiple
been there.
times.
And it today, like, there's hotels all around it. It's not tawdry in the sense of like there being tourist traps just that you can see everywhere by the falls, but there are a lot of hotels all around the falls. Not on this side. This view is pretty much still preserved, but if they were to carry on a little bit further to the left, you'd see the American side, and you'd see all of the American hotels that are there. This is from the Canadian side, right here. But where you're sort of standing, and she points out you're kind of standing in the water here, and that's one reason why it looks so imposing. But when you get this view, you're actually up on a little ridge, and then right behind you are tons of hotels and casinos and duty-free shops and you know, tourist junk shops and all that. You know, so there's been a battle about Niagara Falls, and she pointed out also there was a battle for the actual water of the falls, because when they started tapping the falls for power, this was one of the first ways that we generated electrical power in some size in the United States. So the dam, there's no dam, but what they did was they diverted water from Niagara into a tunnel and then sent it out on the bottom. And in the tunnel, it drove turbines, so that would create the power. This is why Buffalo, New York, was a big industrial center for many years in the 19th and 20th centuries because they had electrical power from Niagara Falls and still do. But at one point they were taking so much water out of the falls to run the turbines that it was like there was no water going over it. It was like this trickle of water going over the falls. And they actually had to get together and have an agreement to let more water go over the falls so that it would look like this, right? Because you literally could stop the water by having almost all of it go through the turbines and create the electric power, So those are some of the things that she talks about in that chapter, which I thought were really interesting. And then the three composers that she mentions, we've already talked about Heinrich, Fry, and Bristow. Each of them had a slightly different approach to capturing this sound of Niagara, right? But all of them were in some way trying to get this majesty of it, trying to capture the majesty of Niagara as a symbol and as this sublime kind of thing. Did you like those pieces? Did you listen to the Fry and the Heinrich pieces? What did you think of them? Any opinions about the Heinrich or the?
I thought the Heinrich was a little bit unusual.
The Heinrich was a little unusual.
It stops and then it starts again. It's very interesting. I thought that was very unusual. I like the Fry.
The Fry makes a little more sense because it kind of goes from the thundering all the way to the the cascade and then back again, and you really can get a good program out of it. The Heinrich, you don't really. There's a lot of stuff that you're just like, what does this have to do with anything?
Sound.
Yeah, sound. Yeah, it's just the sounds of the falls.
I mean, I liked it, but it was definitely just like sounds compared to organized piece.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd hope to spend a little more time on that, but we kind of ran out of time, so we'll leave that aside. And then the last thing to talk about is next week's assignment. And next week's assignment is right at the end of the 19th century, and we'll be focusing on Strauss and Mahler. So we'll look at Don Juan, the tremendous tone poem, which every horn player has stapled on their lips and their heart. And also Mahler Symphony No. 3. I mean, we can do any of the Mahler symphonies, but that one is particularly interesting, so we'll look at Mahler 3. And be sure and read the program notes that I posted for that, because otherwise you'll have maybe a hard time making sense of Mahler 3. We're just going to do movement 1, but movement 1 is like 35 minutes long. So, yeah. And I'm not going to make assignments this week, so just be prepared to discuss these questions that are up here. Okay?
Dr. Baumer.
Yes.
Just to be clear, just because I'm scheduling stuff, we don't have class next week, but this will be on the 29th. That
is correct. I'm sorry, I forgot about Thanksgiving.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure. I was on the right schedule. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So next week, enjoy your break and
I need it.
get lots of research done for your paper. And I will see you after break.
Yeah.